Time. Hi, everybody. This is Jeff over at Talent Reach, and we are Seattle's premier boutique recruiting firm. We're working with agencies who are sick and tired of hiring B-level players. We help them find the A-level, and the A-level means something different to everybody else. So I started this series to talk to people who have much deeper knowledge or smarter than me about certain things that can help dig into some of the issues that people really care about. And today I'm super excited to have Brett Greene on. Hi, Brett.
Hey, Jeff.
And I want to, as a quick introduction, just sort of let everybody know. So, I've got, where's my thing? All right.
Should we just leave the music on? We should just dance.
That's right. We'll dance our way through, right? Since we're going to talk about ADHD and tech and strategies, we're going to probably have to keep things on the rails. So let's start off. Brett, welcome. Brett is a ADHD coach and trainer, as well as a founder of New Tech Northwest. Those of us in the Seattle area and the Pacific Northwest who don't know New Tech, you should check it out. There's some contact information that's running here below. But Brett, I'm going to just turn it over to you. Give us a quick 30-second on who you are, what you'd like to do. Please promote anything right now or later that you would like to. This is a platform I want to provide as much help and resources to the people in our world as possible. So take it over.
Well, first off, I have ADHD, so I will do my best to make this small. Can you turn the music down just a little bit, Jeff? Okay, thanks.
There we go.
Yeah, distraction, right? Squirrel. Music squirrel. So my name's Brett Greene, and I'm the founder of New Tech Northwest. We're a community of 60,000 technologists in the Pacific Northwest. We're basically the hub for the Pacific Northwest for tech. People come to our events and they come to our community to be curious about other people, share what they're up to, and learn things for the next step on their tech, to build their tech career or to build their tech companies. The folks in the community range from people who are fresh out of a boot camp to people who are just new to town trying to figure out what's going on, to investors, C-level, Amazon, Microsoft, Google people, marketers, salespeople. Everyone's welcome. And we have a neighborhood block party vibe to our professional events, but we start with people being human, and folks like that because there aren't a lot of places to go do that, especially with networking. So yeah, that's New Tech. We just celebrate and help grow the Seattle and Pacific Northwest tech community. And I also have a company called Epsilon Coaching with my wife, and she does coaching with women in business and nonprofits and career development. And I most specifically work with tech leaders and professionals who have ADHD or neurodiverse brains, and do trainings at companies to help them better understand their neurodiverse team members and create systems that support them. And I do individual and group coaching around those things. And I've been around tech since about 2006. Just happened to live in Boulder, Colorado when startup became a thing. So I was working with Techstars companies the first few years as just a mentor and friend. So I've been coaching, training, mentoring tech companies, hundreds of tech companies since 2006. And now I've kind of combined my thought that I had ADHD and then getting a diagnosis a few years ago and education around that, along with my master's degree in psychological training. I'm sorry, I'm thinking too fast and can't read. My master's degree in psychological counseling and my coaching experience and my ADHD and just my love of bringing people together. And I'm a community builder, and I love to connect and help people and promote great things. And my greatest joy in life is when somebody comes to me and says, oh, that person you introduced me to, or this person I met at your event, I got this job, I dated this person, I hired this person, I met a new friend. And that kind of brings me the most joy. So with the ADHD piece, now, as soon if you think you might have it and you don't, and you find out, one of the first things that happens is you look back on your whole life and you're like, oh my gosh, that's why I got fired from those jobs. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's why I made those stupid decisions. Oh, that's why I had more car accidents than my friends. You start reading these things about it and you're like, that's me and I never knew it. And there's a whole process that goes through that we could maybe talk about later. But for me, this is kind of a healing full circle of like, wow, career was my Achilles heel. And I didn't know why. And I'm like, I'm smart, but I can't make these things work. And then, new tech was like my first most favorite thing in my life, because I got to be me, do me, help the community, and people liked it. People showed up, and it works. This is kind of an extension of that. And
yeah, I can definitely say that having been to the new tech events, if you're remotely interested in tech, especially if you're in Seattle, you ought to be. They're fantastic events to meet a wide range of people. It's like you said, it's neighborhood block party vibe. I highly recommend it. So what I wanted to really dig in on are some of the talking points that we talked about earlier, especially as they pertain to some of the subjects that I like to talk about. Tech hiring. What's the hiring marketplace look like? What are some of the challenges that people are facing currently? Because the hiring marketplace has changed quite a bit in the past. I mean, if I were to say 2 years, that's going way too far back. It's changed a lot in the past 6 to 9 months, and I'm having picked your brain a little bit about the talent pool and the percentages of people who struggle, challenge. I'm not sure what the word you'd want to help me with in terms of being neurodiverse. Having an ADHD sort of component really affects things like return to office. Really affects retention. It's something that we see when we're recruiting. We're finding people who are able to give good interviews and present their best possible selves in a very compressed amount of time. So start us off. Give me a couple definitions. Talk to me about
sure.
the sort of dumb it down for me. Right, you're the smarter one in the room. ADHD as a definition. I know that we've all heard ADD, ADHD all our lives. It's very common. And I feel like maybe some of the meaning gets lost in the sauce. And then tie that into sort of definitions of neurodiversity. And then we'll start talking about some of the specifics in terms of hiring.
So cool. And thanks for having me here, Jeff. I really appreciate it because I love these conversations, and it's really fun with people who aren't diagnosed, and then we talk and you're like, oh my God, that's me. And also fun with people who already have it who say, oh my God, I'm not alone. I've never had this conversation, and I have no one to talk to, which is why I do the groups and things. So folks can have some community. So the best place to start is probably defining neurotypical, because the other thing is, for a lot of folks, they've never heard the word neurotypical, and they've never heard the word neurodiverse. So neurotypical, and we're talking about our brains. So a neurotypical brain or neurotypical person is somebody who is not affected with a developmental disorder, and especially autism spectrum disorder, which exhibits or is characteristic of typical neurological development. So if you're neurotypical, you probably generally kind of flow with the way things are. As we talk about ADHD and having a neurodiverse brain, if that's you, you'll know instantly. We will talk about some statistics in just a second. In general, officially 15 to 20% of the population is neurodiverse, but it's also known that there's actually more people who are undiagnosed than diagnosed, especially things like ADHD, because if for most folks, if they hear ADHD in their brain, they think of a 4th grade boy running in circles in school. And so what I have is an attentive ADHD, which most of us know as ADD, and officially they dropped ADD and call it ADHD. So that's inattentive ADHD. I don't consider it a disorder. It's really it's a difference, which I think is a lot of kind of what's happening now for people who are in this world, because more people are getting more awareness about it and realizing it's not a disorder. It's that folks who have neurotypical brains created the systems we all work in and live in. And so that's considered normal. And it's not that it's normal, it's that it's what's common. Similar to if you think of somebody with a neurotypical brain versus neurodiverse, it's kind of like if somebody, you saw somebody in America dipping their French fries in mayonnaise before aioli was created. now we do it, but we just give it a fancy name. And people would go, you don't stick French fries in mayonnaise. That's weird. Your French fries go in ketchup. But if the person says, oh, I'm from Canada, and that's how we do it in Canada, they go, oh, okay. And they accept it and go on. that's kind of like having a neurodiverse brain. Our brain is a foreign country. It's a foreign culture. We think in a different way, and sometimes the communication of it doesn't always come out. And I guess, if there is a disorder part of it, it's really that there's ways that we can react to things and handle things that aren't really healthy. But part of the challenge is it's a brain chemistry thing. It's not a choice or a personality thing. So I can ramble. So does that make sense? It's for the neurotypical to kind of understand that, and then I can dive a little more into what neurodiverse.
Yeah, neurotypical makes great sense. It sounds like also there's little control over. It's a nature versus nurture component. Is that what you're saying?
Right. So yeah, great segue. So the way to think about ADHD in particular is that the main factors of it is we have low executive function in our brain and low working memory, low dopamine, serotonin, I can never say this right, norepinephrine. And so that's what we wake up with in the morning. So if you want to visualize it, think about, so executive function, first off, is organization, planning, prioritizing, time management. And then so I guess the time management kind of flows a little into the working memory part of it. Working memory is when you're working on something and then you go to do something else and you come back to that thing and it could be 5 minutes later and you just don't remember. And so what happens for us in our life, us with ADHD or neurodiverse brains, is the people in our lives look at us and go, we just talked about that an hour ago. Like, what the hell? You're an adult. Right. You should know this. I don't get it, because they're looking at us through a neurotypical filter, and they get really confused because people who are neurodiverse almost always are crazy smart, very high IQ, way above average. And so the people around you are really clear that you're not just smart, you're really smart. And then there's this thing that they think is just pretty basic that you didn't do the right way in their mind, or you're doing it weird, or you forgot it, or you didn't do it. And so in their mind, they're like, oh, that person's lazy, or that person is just trying to piss me off. And they're not. It's because
that back to that foreign country thing where you've got somebody who's just not sure how to process what they're seeing, even though it's not really all that, it's not negative or bad.
Right. Yeah. And part of what I want to get into in this interview is like the strengths and the weaknesses, because our strengths are like, they're called, people joke about it being superpowers and kryptonite, because it's almost kind of that extreme. Mm-hmm. And the superpower part of it is that, we're, say 20 to 40% of the population, and the things that we're amazing at, 60% of the population cannot do. Their brains do not work that way. It does not show up.
Give me a good, solid example of that. That's something that's very interesting.
Sure. Can I jump right back to it? I'm sorry. Yes. There's one thing I started to do, and I kind of got off.
Yeah, and if I derail you, let me know.
No, it's not. We are constantly thinking of 3 to 5 things. So I've got 3, 4 conversations going in here. I'm like, oh, tell them that. Oh, tell them that. Oh, let's go over here. Right. So what I was starting to say about the executive function is we have 20% executive function. So the way to think of that is, if you're neurotypical and you wake up in the morning, and let's just say, think of like a car and the parts in an engine. And let's say for your that part of your brain, there's 10 parts in the executive function. If you're neurodiverse or you have ADHD, you wake up every day with 2 of those 10 parts. And then the people with 10 of those parts are judging you based on what they know with 10 parts, because you look like them, you act like them, they know you're smart. So they're like, literally in their brain, it doesn't make sense. Just because they don't have the education or that kind of frame.
And their baseline is like, this is how they don't see that's how they operate it at this particular level. So why would?
Well, if you've never heard that there are people who have 2 parts to your 10, if you've never been told that, then you're just not aware of it. It wouldn't even occur to you. And we'll get into like how this affects hiring in the workplace too. But that's kind of the easiest way to understand how our executive function and our working memory are different. So an example I like to share, talking fast, need lots of water, is even though it wasn't, said that Steve Jobs specifically had ADHD, if you look at the definitions of ADHD, you kind of know he did. and one of his famous things was how he wore the same clothes every day, and people and it was just put as like, oh yeah, he wants to get more done. Yes, and he's neurodiverse. He would wake up in the morning and have 2 of those 10 parts to make decisions. And he wanted to innovate. He wanted to create products because one of our superpowers is innovation and drive and resilience and creativity and seeing these things, dots people don't see, problems they don't even see. We've seen the problems, we put it together, we've worked out 5 solutions before anyone else even knows that it's there. But sometimes when we have trouble having that communicated because we did all this up here and you didn't, nobody else was on that journey. So it's kind of like when you turn in the math test and they're like, oh, we want to see your work. And it's like, but the answer is right. And they're like, yeah, the answer is right, but we want to see your work. And it's like, you want to put like a camera in my brain?
The Sherlock Holmes story where Holmes just reads Watson's mind and he's like, well, how did you get to that? And he's like, well, because he unrolls the story in his head about how he got there.
Exactly.
But right. Getting from the brain to the mouth sometimes is a challenge.
So that's what we are doing with 3 to 5 things most minutes of every day. And then there's a piece of ADHD that I always want to bring up because to me this is the crux of it for everybody. And we're talking about generalities, and so there's the blanket things, but we're also humans. We have our own personalities and experiences of who we are. On top of the fact that if you are neurodiverse or you have ADHD, you most likely have a comorbidity, which means that you probably have another neurological, what would be, considered a disorder. So, so there's probably some blend of ADHD, autistic spectrum disorder, attention, deficit hyperactivity disorder, developmental speech disorders, dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, dysnomia, intellectual disability, or Tourette syndrome. And so they all go along with those things kind of bring in depression and anxiety kind of flow with those things too. So it's really rare for someone to have, just that. And when you read the list of the famous people, that you're not surprised when you read Einstein, Richard Branson, right. There's a long list of like Steve Jobs that are the usual suspects. You're like, oh yeah, I can totally see where they had, or they talk about, like Richard Branson has talked about having dyslexia for a really long time. So generally there's kind of a combination of these things going on. And the good thing is the more we have education around it, then we can have better communication. We can create systems that are more supportive, and people are more effective in their jobs. They're happier in their jobs. They stop getting fired for really stupid things like not being able to write a good report or being late for meetings or these inputs that don't matter, because most companies, unfortunately, focus on the wrong inputs in my mind versus the outputs. Like if what you're, what you're really considered with is ROI and effectiveness, then it's good to kind of look at things in a different way and maybe not hold somebody to all the 20 things on the job role. Find the things that they're really not good at and either give them a partner or an assistant to help with those things, or just delegate that to someone else and let them do what they're awesome at.
Well, but and that's a great segue.
That's a crux of why people, get fired when they shouldn't, and why there's high turnover. That if the companies had more education around this, it's great for culture. It's great for retention. It's great for attracting talent. So,
well, and last one of these LinkedIn lives we did, and everybody should check it out in my feed. I was talking to Pam Teagarden about it was a very similar thing, but how people communicate. So, for example, an introverted individual, maybe an engineer, is just going to communicate differently in an environment than somebody else. And that's fine. Culture is what you've got, as opposed to sort of this manufactured thing we're trying to get to, because you can't control it at a certain point. What she was saying was that as long as you have the ability, management has the ability to bring all of that out into the light, it's easier to manage because you can say, okay, great. I realize what we've done is we've had this open air, like open plan system of the office. There's tons of noise, there's tons of disruptions. And this person who needs a little bit of extra time or a lot of extra time to focus and maintain that, the cognitive switching cost is just too high. Sounds like, and I'd like to move into sort of, these ideas of hiring people, supporting, retaining, because churn is such an expensive thing. Talk to me a little bit about the ADHD component of it. What can management do? So we'll work reverse. What can they do once they have somebody in to identify, to communicate, to make sure that someone's comfortable? Talk about inclusivity, right? ADHD isn't part of the inclusivity conversation a lot, and I'd like it to be.
Right. Yeah, it barely is. And I'm actually working with a couple of companies who have ERGs for neurodiverse folks, but there aren't a lot of companies that are doing that. So they see the folks that are specific and obvious, but there's neurodiverse aspects that are or diagnoses that are covered by Americans for Disability Association. It's just the conversation's not there, and that's part of why I'm having conversations like this with people like you, is to get the conversation out there, because usually when we start talking about the aspects of this, light bulbs start going off, and people either go, oh wow, that's me, or oh my gosh, I totally know people like that, because you do. We're 40% of the population. And for hiring managers and HR folks and leaders, it can help a lot, because if you just think it's a behavior somebody has, then you're like, oh, well, you know what it is now, so let's do these other things and make it change. And then when you aren't able to do those things, they think you're being insubordinate or you're lazy. First thing, neurodiverse people, least laziest people on the planet. So we get labeled as lazy all the time because neurotypical folks they don't understand that we are paddling like a duck in our brain all the time. And I'm jumping around again. I'm sorry, but I hope this is all helpful. The thing I meant to mention earlier that I didn't get to, huge piece of ADHD is rejection sensitive dysphoria.
Yeah, and we talked about that earlier, for sure.
So that's a huge issue, and why a lot of folks get fired.
Well, actually, let me. So, if you don't mind, I'm going to keep you on the. I'll keep you on the rails, because that's really, really important. But to that point, right? The precursor to that, what can hiring managers, what can sales managers, what can tech managers do initially to crack the nut a little bit, and sort of, because if someone's hired me and sat me down and says, okay, great, listen, you're ADHD, so we need to talk about some things, I might get a little mad, because I don't think of myself as that way.
Well, yeah, you can't.
And this goes to what you're just saying, is like being criticized obviously is much more sensitive. It's much more sensitive issue. So, so what can they? And
here's the number one thing is, don't even worry about the labels of neurodiverse or ADHD. You just do these things that are good hiring practices, that are kind. And so, add to your interview process questions like, or have people write out, like, what are the 10 things that you're best at? What are the 10 things that you're really not good at? There's also other weird factors here, like how safe does somebody feel saying? That's why if you ask, like, oh, or do you have autism, or do you have ADHD? Then people are, especially like an interview, you probably can't ask that, I don't think, legally, but it puts someone on the defensive, because you haven't established a relationship. They don't know if it's safe yet, and they don't know, and most folks who are diagnosed or are put off a diagnosis, it's because they don't feel safe at work, and they're like, are they going to fire me for this? And legally, they can't fire you for that, but we know companies all the time just make something else up. So they don't have to say that was the thing. They can make it something else. But if you've gone on record with your HR person that you have ADHD, the good news is that diagnosis was made around like 1930 or something. So at this point, there's tons of studies, tons of tools and support systems and help. So if they know that, there's a definition about low executive function, low working memory, low serotonin. So if you know these things, you're like, oh, well, if people have this, generally our kryptonite are writing reports, creating decks, anything to deal with organization, planning, prioritizing, sometimes time, sometimes not. And there's varieties of this, right? So I mean, I've been shocked that I have clients and people that I've talked to who have ADHD who are project managers that are crazy successful. And I'm like, how do you do that? Well, the reason they do it is because all humans make up systems, even if it's unconscious, because we have to adapt. And so if they realized that when they were a little kid, that they had a hard time with organizing and they couldn't keep up, they built those systems, decades ago.
Right.
And then now they know, oh, when this happens, I need to do this and it'll go here. And so they're comfortable in that place and they thrive in that place. And, the other reasons we get fired is we do things that are bored. Neurodiverse folks generally gravitate to jobs that are about 20% structure, 80% freedom. Tell us what the finish line is, be clear about it, give us a deadline. We might not work on it till 2 days before, but you'll hit the deadline and you'll get twice as good of a result as you expected if it's not, in that executive function working memory category. Yeah. And you'll be thrilled.
So the people I talk to, you said 20% of people, although undiagnosed, is much higher.
Well, it doesn't matter if you're diagnosed or undiagnosed. Your brain is your brain, right? So, and we gravitate. So we gravitate to jobs like sales and marketing, project management, engineering, obviously, and entrepreneurship is huge. And generally, the things where it can be indisputable that we did something great, and then we aren't having to deal with politics, because usually we get fired because if it's a command and control type of culture, we suck, because we need to be in a meritocracy. Because if you tell us what you want and we know we can do that and we're good at it, we're going to kick butt on it and you're going to be like, wow. But if we do that and the guy who does half the job we do but drinks beers with the right people gets promoted, then we just get deflated. Or if we get moved into a position that's boring, because that's the other part of it is, the stereotypical squirrel thing is really that we were attracted to novelty. And the reason is, again, think about if you have 2 parts out of 10, are the low serotonin, low dopamine, our brain is trying to fill that space. So, medication, education, coaching, and therapy kind of help with these things. But specifically, if you think about medication, it's kind of weird. With the medication are amphetamines, or things that are considered to be speed. And if you give, or even if you gave cocaine to a person with ADHD, they would calm down. And the reason is because the things that make an atypical brain take off, our brain is taken off. We're up there all the time. But there's this gap, and the medication fills that gap. And that's what actually helps us to kind of slow down a bit. The typical example is that we have race car brains and bicycle brakes. Medication, coaching, education kind of, in my mind, gives us motorcycle brakes. We're never going to have car brakes. Our engine is never going to be a Honda Civic. And we're surrounded by Honda Civics, but we're driving Lamborghinis. As far as what we're thinking and how things are going.
Let me throw something at you real quick, because I'm hearing you say we a lot. Is this a blanket, if you're neurodiverse, these in ADHD, this just happens? There's not much of a variability. I realize there's variability amongst how it manifests, but you're describing a whole lot of my world, and it's kind of spooky. So is that
most of the characteristics? Like I said, we're not robots, and there are different comorbidities. So somebody who also has dyslexia is going to have it a little different than somebody has autism, or depending on where they are, on the spectrum, mixed with the ADHD. Most of the characteristics are going to be the same, although like I would say like on a scale of 10, I might be like a 4 with organization. And I have clients that are 10s, even though they have ADHD. So just because you just know that these are the specific,
they're still operating, they're still
things
paddling.
that might be challenges. Yeah. And that's the great thing about when there is a diagnosis, is that now you can define it and you can go, oh, here are the things that are strong. Here are the things that are weak. Number one, delegate the weak stuff. You don't try to make weak stuff better. The stuff we're strong with is what keeps making the, technology wouldn't exist without people with ADHD and autism. They're the ones who had the ideas. We're like, why are we doing it that way? And if we move this thing over here and we did this thing and we did this thing, and like, 1,000 songs in your pocket, that's an ADHD idea.
So disruptors are ADHD.
Right. So, we're 29% like more likely to be entrepreneurs. If you have ADHD, you're 300% more likely to be an entrepreneur. And 29% of entrepreneurs have ADHD. But if we have ADHD, we're 70% more likely to struggle with emotional dysregulation. So, none of us were there, but if you think about the stories you heard about, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs when they were being real a-holes, if you read about these things, it's like, oh, well, when you have these ideas and you have a hard time communicating them, and you're like, why don't people understand? How do people not see this thing that's so obvious? And then we have this penchant for being defensive sometimes on things that are really small and shouldn't, and having a horrible tone with people. And that's what, again, where medication and things like that help to kind of like slow us down, so some things don't get out of our mouth, or we don't do that thing that's going to blow up. And especially with, partners, spouses, people that we love, people that we work with and for, a lot of times we keep frustrating them, and we keep having things blow up. And we're like, the most frustrating thing for us is we specifically go, okay, I know it's going to happen here, and I'm intentionally doing everything to make that thing not blow up. And then 4 minutes later, that thing blows up because I did or didn't do or say something. And it happens over and over multiple times a day, which is like that's the rejection sensitive dysphoria part, is when you have people telling you every single day, you're so smart, but you do dumb things, or that's weird. These things that feel like criticisms. And when people say it, they may not even mean to be criticizing. But when you get that, every day of your life, 3 to 5 times a day, 1, you become resilient. 2, you create systems. 3, you get independent. And those characteristics actually, build into some other strengths that help some things.
And if you're a manager, if you're somebody who's, wherever you are in leadership, obviously it seems like you shouldn't be telling somebody that they're stupid or they're lazy. But I think that's a given.
Well, sometimes what they tell other people, right? They'll you'll get they'll tell a third party in the office, like, oh yeah, John's really lazy. Because he can't get his reports in on time.
I'm working so hard over here and he can't do it.
Because he's always 5 minutes late for meetings. And it's like, well, the fact is he's 5 minutes late for meetings, and your opinion and their interpretation is because of that he's disobeying or whatever. And if you would ask him, instead of assuming what's going on, hey, I notice you're late for meetings a lot. Is that kind of hard for you to do? Is there maybe some kind of system we could do? Maybe if you want me to ping you 5 minutes before meetings or something,
what helps? How can I?
We'll do that.
Well, we know that
then that's a different way to go about it.
Totally, and we know that the biggest, I wouldn't even call it a hidden cost anymore in any business, is churn, is losing people. And you've said over and over again, ADHD people tend to get fired for these particular types of reasons, and you just outlined a situation as to why. And I think you just touched on a way for teams to implement systems that keep that from happening. I mean, almost completely. Is that fair?
And that's the great part of it.
Talk a little bit about some of that cost.
Yeah. So when you have the education, you know what that is. Then then you can actually do something about it, and you can help that. So yeah, I mean, as you say, companies are losing millions of dollars from firing neurodiverse employees. They're losing money rehiring for the positions. They're losing money by asking neurodiverse folks to operate in a neurotypical world, and it's only because of lack of education. They're not. It's not that they want to have ineffective employees.
They're not doing it on purpose.
It's just that they haven't realized that they have that. And once you realize these things, you can create neurodiverse accommodation. So, I mean, the basic thing I think of, and granted, I'm not a hiring manager. I'm not in a, company with 30 to 3,000 people to try to figure these things out, but I talk with them. So it's not always easy to kind of turn the battleship. But the great thing is you can look at the definitions for these neurodiverse conditions and go, okay, well, these are the weaknesses. How do we eliminate those? Or how do we accommodate those? So, for instance, a pretty common thing for salespeople, I'll go with a different industry, like, salespeople in insurance. A lot of times the companies that really thrive, they have the salespeople are doing the stuff they love. And they're out there having conversations, they're sharing the options, they're working on closing things. And when they close someone, they have one person, sometimes one person who's an assistant for 2, 3, 4 people. And that is the person who sends out the emails, that puts the proposals together, and or puts like 80% of it together, and then the salesperson can kind of go over it and go, oh, we need to move this, we need to add this thing, here's a specific thing. But the things that, because, and I don't know that the industry knows they're neurodiverse, I think the industry just figured out we make more money when the salespeople get to go sell and they're happier. And so they created a system. Now, with a tech company or a certain department, same thing. Once you realize, like, okay, we have 20 to 40% of our employees who are probably struggling with these things, let's find the people who are great at organization, and they're great at planning, and they're great at writing reports, and give that to them as an assistant, or an assistant to 3 or 4 people, or someone that they can just lean on when they need these specific tasks to help with, to do that. And I will say the other thing with tech companies, it's challenging in that particular arena, is there's so much private IP. So that's the one thing that's really hard. Like, for a lot of engineers, they're working in secure environments that you have to have approval to be in. And so if there's not somebody who has that level of approval, then they don't have a person that can come in and look at these things and put them together and put them on paper, or they can't have that conversation with a person who doesn't have approval. So that can be challenging. But companies who understand that could give approval, or create a job, a specific project manager or assistant project manager person that has those approvals, that specifically works with anyone, and just put it out like, hey, anyone who's not really good at these things or doesn't like doing these things, this is your person. John is going to be the person that helps you with this thing. And so if C has ADHD, now she's not on the hook for the report that is going to take her 10 hours to write something that's crappy, and she's going to procrastinate it, not because she's lazy, because she knows it sucks, and she has rejection sensitive dysphoria, and she knows she's going to get criticized, and she's like, okay, now I got to walk into this thing again. But if that, Susie has John, who likes to write reports and is good at putting those kind of systems together, and go, hey, here's the thing I have, and I need help with this, and Susie can talk it, and John can write it down and put it there. And then Susie can look it over and go like, oh, okay, yeah, it's the last 20% of it, 10% of it. Now it's ready to go. Then it gets done faster. It gets done on time. And Susie isn't wasting 10 hours doing something she sucks at. So the company, and that's where I think companies lose the most money. Companies lose the most money on having neurodiverse folks do what's listed in the job role. And so they hire you for a title and go, this is what you're supposed to do. And it's like, well, okay, let's be human about it. And then go on this list, let the person you hired give you a rating, 1 through 5. I suck at it, or I'm awesome. And if it's like a 3 or under, consider them not doing that stuff. Because if you take that stuff off their plate, now their time is just opened up to innovate and hyper focus and do the things that are their superpowers to help your company make more money, for them to be more efficient, for them to enjoy their job and be fulfilled, for them to want to stay. And that's the biggest reason why people leave their jobs, is because they're not happy.
You've now brought us sort of to the front side of the hiring funnel, which is the job description, which we all know sometimes are written to be just like this unicorn. I want somebody to be super intellectual.
When's the last time you read a job description that wasn't a combination of at least 3 people, maybe 5 wish lists of, like, you write it out, and I mean, you could read 100 job roles and just say, okay, out of 100, where have I met one person in my life ever that fit one of these 100? And your answer will probably be 0. So
we see it all the time. But what I'm hearing you say is a hiring manager has the opportunity to create a job description for someone that they know will be neurodiverse, and have a sort of a two-way conversation about, hey, here are the elements that we're looking for. Rate yourself on those. Mm-hmm. And that seems really positive in a way to say, mm-hmm. Okay, great. If we hire you, we understand you're going to stink at job, your TPS reports. And
exactly. Great example.
So it's okay to ask somebody to do the TPS reports,
but ask the person who enjoys it and is good at it. Right. And that's another, another challenge for neurodiverse folks in the workplace, is if you asked everyone in the office who likes to write TPS reports, would anyone raise their hand? So what happens is
some people like reports,
but very few. So what happens is the neurotypical folks, this is where we get pegged as being, insubordinate or something, because a lot of these things are lazy. Because if you say, oh, well, most people don't like to write reports, because they're looking at it from a neurotypical place. And it's like, yeah, most people don't like to do it. But if you think of it as the fact that the neurodiverse folks have 2 parts in their brain out of 10 to do that task, the truth is you're not being a good manager, and you don't have good systems in your company if you are requiring people who have 2 of those parts out of 10 to do that task, because you're wasting their time. You're, whatever they cost you per hour, they're not spending on stuff that they're awesome at, that could actually be helping your company. You're making them unhappy, which might make them leave. And then meanwhile, they're amazing at this other stuff that they're not getting done that could help your company and make them want to stay.
So, yeah. And so let's talk about that for just, if you don't mind me, I hope I'm not jumping around too much. But now we've got this ideal of, okay, bringing on somebody with the full understanding that, you're a neurodiverse individual. We have coaching and management that's set into place to where we have, this understanding. So you're not going to be miserable. We're not going to be told you're stupid, all these fun things. What tools now can a manager use to really unlock those superpowers? Is it as simple as like taking the stuff that they are not good at, these 8 parts out of 10 off their plate, or reducing it? I realize you can't. You're right. Every situation is different. You can't completely make it a perfect situation. But
I mean, that's the simplest. Yeah, and so let's just take it a step further. Drop the neurodiverse part. Okay. Wouldn't it be great to do that with all your employees? Whether they're neurotypical or they're neurodiverse, wouldn't it be great if you were, as a practice in your company, which obviously thousands of them or millions actually do, use Strength Finder, use Myers-Briggs, use, a lot of companies do use those things to figure out how to put people in the right place. So it's not that, and again, nothing's like black or white. Everything's a spectrum, sure. Right? Everybody has its shades of gray, white, and black. And so there could be companies that are using Strength Finder, and they do have systems, but maybe every 6 months or once a year, they could go back and look at, well, what are the systems we have in place around the Strength Finder characteristics, or go talk to the best thing is to never assume. and go ask people questions, because then you actually learn reality, and it's usually different than what the folks are thinking who aren't, living in that world and in those shoes every day. And then from there, you can create new systems. There's other companies that don't even know what Strength Finder is. And they may not know what Myers-Briggs is. They may not have done any kind of, personality or skills testing, but that's an easy way. Just do that for your entire company. And then the biggest part of this, first off, start off being human. And then when you find out these things, even by asking them and having people share these things, and if your way of handling that is honoring them and respecting them and giving them experience that, okay, we're going to give you, some kindness and grace around these things that you're not any good at. And we want to pour fuel on the stuff that you're great at. It's just a smart way to run a business, right? Mm-hmm. And that's another part of it is you can drop the labels and just go, well, is there one person in your team who couldn't benefit from having a practice like that? No. And is there any way you could do those things and it would make your company be the same or worse? No. So, okay, these are new practices that you should either add if you don't have them, or kind of evaluate again to figure out, okay, well, this is how well we think it's working. How could we make it work better?
Yeah, I love that. Okay, cool. So I'm looking at some of the notes that you've got here that we talked about. And one of the things that that stuck out are some of these percentages of sort of where they excel, right? 20% structure, 80% freedom, which we've been talking about. What about longevity? Like, do people who are neurodiverse or ADHD, do they hop around? Because we see one of the big challenges in resume finding that interviewees or candidates, will move around a lot. Is that due, do you think, to go ahead.
Number one, boredom.
Okay.
Yeah. No, number two, too much of their job being focused on things that require executive function and require working memory. And so they're not good at it. So do you want to stay in a job that most days when you wake up, the tasks you have to perform are ones you're not good at or that you can't deliver on well? How does that make you feel? Why would you stay in that job? It's just, you doing self-care or you figuring out what to do. So I'll just kind of spit out some statistics.
Yeah, please. That's great.
So this might kind of help. So, as I was saying before, if you have ADHD, 29% of entrepreneurs have ADHD. If you have ADHD, you're 70% more likely to struggle with emotional dysregulation, like, being overly defensive over stupid things, not being, the best socially. You get into your hyper focus and you're doing great work, but you don't realize that you're ignoring the people around you. And so they feel like you're, arrogant or a jerk. And this is, home and work. So, we have a lot of work to do, in our personal lives with people too, to take responsibility for the kind of things that we create. If you have ADHD, like, you're 300% more likely to be an entrepreneur. You generally earn 77% of what a neurotypical person in the same job earns. So then now think about the compounded thing. What if you are a Black woman with ADHD? How does that affect your pay versus your peers? Right. So there's also that compounding effect, because we're complex beings, and their lifetimes. 12.9% of men and 5% of women will be diagnosed. If it's left untreated, usually ADHD folks lose an average of 22 days of productivity per year. Part of that is one thing that happens with us with hyperfocus. Engineers are an easy way to explain it because they do sprints. So, when they get to a sprint and they're getting to the end of a sprint, that's when they hit the Red Bull and the Mountain Dew and they're not getting sleep and they get that thing in. But we're, climbing that mountain, you get to the top of the mountain, you hit the sprint. It's awesome. They love what you turned in. And then you're at the top of the mountain and that's all you were thinking about. And now you're looking around and you're like, oh my God, there's a whole mountain range here. What do I do? So and if you have rejection sensitive dysphoria, you're expecting to be criticized, you're expecting rejection, you're expecting to be told, something that isn't great. And so you're at the top of the mountain, you succeeded in the thing, you're euphoric for 30 minutes. And then in coaching, it's called the saboteur in our brain that we all know. For ADHD, I call it the yeah, but troll, because that's what happens is, so you could cure cancer. Let's just say that's what you're doing. You get to the top of the mountain, you cured cancer, and you're like, wow, I did that. It was awesome. It's so good. You're running on the adrenaline. And then about 30 minutes later, the adrenaline starts to come down. The yeah, but troll comes out and goes, multiple sclerosis, man. It's so another very common thing with ADHD and neurodiverse folks is if somebody handed us our career portfolio of what we've done and we looked at it, we go, oh, wow, that's awesome. That person's done a lot. They're cool. But when we look at it and it's ourselves, we're like, yeah, but multiple sclerosis, right? Yeah, I mean, I've had people go like, "Oh,
don't give themselves the credit they deserve."
Yeah, and there isn't a real way to totally change that. I mean, I live with this like every day, and I'm just grateful. Like New Tech worked out, and the coaching thing is huge because I get it because I live it, and people need help here. But I've had people for years go like, "Oh, you spoke at the White House, you worked for record labels, and you hung out with rock stars, and my first career was in the music business." And to me, it's like I was just doing what I did, and I'm grateful, and it was great. But I don't look at those things as like, ooh, that was cool, or that's my. But we had different barometers. My barometer of fulfillment is other people coming back and going, "Oh, I saw that podcast with you and Jeff, and I realized I have ADHD, and now I figured this out, and I was having all these problems with my boss, and now I know why, and so now we can talk about it and figure out a system to make it work." So, so I jumped off the statistics, and I could go into more, but the other part with the like, you can talk to your boss. This is the fantastic and probably good place to come towards the end of this is when we have the descriptions and we know what the weaknesses are. The key for us is education, medication, coaching, and support. And then in the workplace, well, I mean, for ourselves, but the things neurotypical people can think about is how you can support neurodiverse people. What we need to do, think Steve Jobs and his clothes, right? Fewer steps, because fewer steps is executive function. So imagine we have 2 of those parts. You have 10. We wake up in the morning. If we're asked to make a lot of decisions and plan and organize stuff, by 11 a.m. or 12, that part's gone. So you think of the joke of a couple sitting down after work and going, what do you want to eat? What do you want to eat? I don't know. The ADHD person, if they're like, oh, what do you want to eat? It's like potato chips or French gourmet or Mexican. As long as you pick it, I'm going to eat it, because our executive function was kaput by 2 p.m. And so the other thing is, so this, then okay, you're like, as much as you can control when you have meetings, have the brainstorming meetings in the afternoon where it's kind of free floating. You're there. If you have to have meetings where you're making decisions or you're analyzing things, schedule those early in the morning when your brain is going to be fresh and you can participate. And so that's another thing that where we confuse people, because you're like, oh, that person's really smart, but in meetings, we ask him a question and he can't answer it. And it's like, well, because our processors are 50 times faster than yours. And so when you ask a question, we're not looking at one answer. As soon as we have an answer, we've got 5 other angles of like, yeah, but what if this was here, and what if we moved it over here, and we did, and that. So if other people talk about it and it goes around for 10 minutes, then after 10 minutes of processing, we can say this thing and people are like, that's amazing. But if it's give me a sound bite, our brains aren't wired that way.
Yeah, it
And
takes practice.
so, yeah, and well, it's not practice if you have two parts. And that's my point is people
Right.
they're like, oh, well, you know what it is, you know what the problem is. So now, go flip that light switch and don't ever do that again. And it's like, no, dude, it's brain chemistry.
Right.
It's, and so,
So
the bad news is it's never going to go away. The good news is this, I'm going to bring it right back to what I almost said, is fewer steps and creating systems that are strategic. That's how we support. So an easy thing is how many people, put their keys in a little bowl by the door.
Mm-hmm.
So you know where you keep your phone. You know where you keep your keys. That's a simple way. So Steve Jobs wore the same clothes every day. So when he opened his closet, he's like, grab a pair of jeans, grab a thing, put it on, I'm out. So I'm not wasting my time. And people thought of it as time. They're like, oh, he doesn't want to waste his time on that. No, man.
Cognitive.
He didn't want to waste his executive function because he needed to go create an iPod and a MacBook. Yeah. And so he's like, who cares what I'm wearing? That's again, inputs and outputs. He's, and that's another thing to reverse people. We focus on outputs. So good news for companies. Tell us what effectiveness you want. Tell us what ROI you want. Don't move the finish line.
Yeah.
But if you tell us clearly what you want, when you want it, and what you want it to be, we'll over deliver, and we'll still in our our little troll's going to go, you could have done that so much better. But other people who don't have an ADHD brain look at it and they're like, how do you come up with that? And it's not a better thing. It's just different because we all have different strengths and we all have different weaknesses. So once you know what these things are, you can create internal systems and then subsystems that have fewer steps. And number one, delegate all of the executive function and working memory things, and stop judging people on those as far as their job performance. Judge a job performance on merit. Judge a job performance. If you're paying them to get a job done, focus on, did the job get done, and is it what I wanted? And forget all of the stupid minutia drama things, from personalities and clicks and command and control ways of doing things.
For all of this, but it seems like you've got a cycle of, if you have an ADHD manager, they might want to dig up the plant to see if the seeds are growing, and it's like, so the last thing in the last couple minutes here, aside from calling you and engaging with you for some coaching, which seems like a really smart idea, what resources have you found? Books or TED Talks or anything out there for continued growth?
Yeah.
For both, people.
Again, the good news is, the good news is there's a lot now. There's a lot of great things out there. So I'm assuming I think you have, links to my, website down here and stuff. If anybody wants to email me, Brett at epsiloncoaching.com, BRETT at epsiloncoaching.com. I do have a list of resources I just kind of copy and paste to send people. And I'm happy to, share that with people. Or Jeff, if you have a way of displaying that underneath the video, people watch it later.
Which
then
one?
I'm happy to if you have a way to, in the description of this interview that's recorded, then I can also send you these resources with the links, so people could just, while they're watching the video, they could look down and they could see them and they could click on them. Or people can email me. I like to connect and help people, right? So
sure.
Don't ever think twice about emailing me. And if I can help, I want to help, and I'll do the best that I can.
Yeah. Well, excellent. I think we really ran through it for a couple of people, that are neurodiverse. I think we got through sort of exactly what we wanted to cover. So nice job early in the morning.
Well, see,
here on the Pacific.
There's a good example. You originally asked to do this interview at like 2 or 3 in the afternoon. And I was like, I can do it, but I know it's gonna be way better if I can, use a little executive function power and not have it already depleted.
Well, this is great. I really, really appreciate you sharing. For anybody who's watching, the recorded video will be available. And Brett, you're, as always, just one of the best people on the planet. So please come back and let me know how we can also support you in the future.
Okay. Thanks, Jeff. I really appreciate it. And I hope this was helpful for folks.
Fantastic. Have a good one.